And a very warm welcome to everybody who's listening in. Thank you so much. We value your time. My name is Apulak, as Niharika mentioned, and it's always a delight to get a chance to speak to all of you. We have a stellar panel post this. Then we have our friends from Dell, having a great session after mine. So I think without further ado, I'll probably jump right in. The idea was to give you a context as to why we are assembled today. Why are we talking about business resilience? So let me begin my story uh, by talking about one thing. I believe, see, I've tracked the enterprise technology space for some time now. And I personally believe, every technology has its time. Every solution has its time. So there was a time when, not to mention that they are not, they've reached a level of obsolescence. But, if you remember about 10, 12 years back when cloud was introduced to India, there was a lot of noise around what cloud is, what it stands for, how it changes your things, how the way you do things, and so on and so forth. 5 years prior to that, you had the story about virtualization. Every company wanted to virtualize their environments. There were a lot of noise about green IT, if you remember. So I feel, and there is a reason why, you know, every technology has its own time. So today, when we speak about, business resilience, we want to pivot primarily around this entire area of BCP planning, which is business continuity planning and disaster recovery. But before we dovetail to that, let me set uh, a few contextual elements here. What I personally feel when we talk about digital transformation, there are various ways to define digital transformation. Some companies do it across metrics. How we do it is because digital transformation is a journey in itself, right? It's not a uh, ad hoc solution that you do and you forget about it, right? And we have evolved over several years, for especially at least I'm talking about organizations which have been in existence for several years. And what you expect from a digital transformation are different and depend completely entirely on what you're trying to achieve, right? But by and large, I think we thought of bucketizing these three into three key elements of processes, strategy, and last but not least, internal and external stakeholders. Why I call this out is because we feel that I'll take a step back. Everybody who has read history, and I'm sure all of us have, or at least been forced to read history. When we talk about history, it always used to about AD and BC. I'm sure you concur, right? AD is that Anno Domini, BC was before Christ period. So I feel for I mean I don't know whether it's a good reason or a bad reason, but it's a reason nonetheless that in modern history, the world would be seen in the pre-pandemic phase and the post-pandemic phase, because very rarely do we come across scenarios such as the pandemic, which changes how we look at the world completely, right? So I feel when we have something as a pandemic, it is bound to have far-reaching consequences, even in terms of digital transformation. Let's let's look at how are some of the areas have shifted or gravitated from a pre-pandemic phase to a post-pandemic phase. Just to mention a couple of points, if you see some data points here to further corroborate what I'm saying. Say, for instance, importance of remote working models for operational efficiency has increased from 36% to 64%. In fact, I'm surprised with the 64% because I mean, if you were to ask me, I probably would have pegged it at a higher number, right? Uh, Business continued disaster recovery, when we're talking about the solution itself, is seen as a critical element for your digital transformation efforts. Earlier, the number was pegged at 43%. Now it's a 72%. And because let's recognize the fact that when we talk about business continuity, right? I don't see, I mean, 5 years back, I did not see this as a high priority element for an IT decision maker or a CIO like you, right? But now, in pandemic, you have the biggest use case of what business disruption can mean to your organization. But hats off to people like you who've ensured that our downtime was really as minimal as possible. But very importantly, it's made our eyes pop out and understand how critical it is to keep our organization moving regardless of the challenges that we are facing. So on and so forth. If you look at the be it cloud adoption, or you investing on security, uh, privacy protocols, or you investing in advanced technologies. A lot is being spoken about IoT, AI, ML, right? You see a surge because, like I said, with the post-pandemic world, how we do things, how we are transforming ourselves as individuals and as organizations, the pandemic has really worked as a catalyst towards all of that. So, namely, the first two, and this is what we're going to focus a lot today about, the essence of business continuity and remote work have actually almost reached a 2x growth in the last 6 months to 9 months. And let's see a reason for that. Because when we think about, I mean, you take a step back, right? When you thought about business continuity previously, what were some of the elements that made you think of business continuity? You thought of either a natural calamity, which was a rare occurrence, but nonetheless, you had to be prepared for that, which is why, you made sure that your DR site is on a different seismic zone, so on and so forth, right? Or, as we all know, there were also challenges in and around, what about accidental deletion of your data, and which is why you wanted to, focus your energies on backup, and have a DR site in place, so on and so forth. But I think the pandemic taught us one very important thing. When we speak about business continuity, it's more holistic, right? It is not just about your data residing in your backend infrastructure, but it is about keeping the lights on from all the angles. I mean, the case in point, when if we did not have our devices and the connectivity, our work would have come to a standstill because none of us were able to go back to offices. So I think when the pandemic taught us what resilience really means and how remote work has been one of the big cheerleaders of enabling anytime, anywhere work, securing everything and connect everyone. Just to substantiate my data, if you see here, 72% CEOs felt that remote accessibility and virtual environments were key catalysts for workplace efficiency, and this was further uh, elevated by higher productivity by employees also. What I'm trying to say here is, until and unless both the parties, be it the employee or the employer, sees advantage of the scenario, you can't see, tangible and sustainable benefit. So, remote work, conceptual hybrid work is here to stay, but there are certain challenges that are also over there due to remote work. Because we're talking about a world of internet which is open and not so secure as your fabric that you have within your organization offices, right? So 80% CIOs felt that remote work increased their likelihood of a security breach, and I completely agree to that. The kind of security breaches that have taken shape, be it in terms of volume and value, have really grown up significantly. And not to mention the entire digital connect. You cannot think about an environment where you do not collaborate and cooperate with your workforce on a daily basis while working remotely. So I think it pivots you to understand how business continuity and resilience is something that a company cannot do without. But having said so, I like to believe one thing, and I'll take a pause here before I share my next slide. Like I said, in so many years of tracking the enterprise tech space, whenever I used to speak about business continuity and disaster recovery, some of the challenges, like I said, when we used to speak about, were in around human errors, natural calamities, geopolitical tensions, which is why you need to have a backup in place. And also, it was not possible or feasible for you to maybe have a full pronged strategy of a BCDR for all your workloads. So what typically organizations do is focus on the crown jewels, focus on the top 4 or 5 applications, make sure that they were backed up very securely. So that was one element. But what was missing in that conversation was the threat vectors. Now, just come to think of it, when I'm talking about business disruption, do you know the biggest cause for business disruption is actually not a natural calamity and it's not a human error? Because nowadays, with so much advancements in hardware, hardware crashes are very limited, failures don't happen that often. The biggest threat, the biggest cause of disruption for most organizations actually happen to be cybersecurity. So it's very important that cybersecurity is a key element of a BCDR plan, right? I'll give you, there are 3 data points here. For instance, there was there was a 45% increase in phishing attacks from in the post-pandemic phase or during the pandemic phase. It is apparently said, there's a loss of close to $5.4 million. That's the average global cost of data breach as we speak. Highlighting the rising importance of security and in a remote work environment, right? Also, the loss of reputational damage is unprecedented. Imagine you are a leading organization within your industry and you are hit by, say, a ransomware attack, right? And your systems are down for, say, 2 days, 3 days. What happens? Because if you're in an industry which is front facing with your customers, you lose faith, you lose credibility. I mean, just to add to these points, which was the number one threat vector last year in 2022? It was ransomware. In fact, 1 out of 4 attacks that were done was a ransomware attack. So my point that I'm trying to make is, when we speak about business continuity and disaster recovery planning, it is not possible today to think of business continuity and disaster recovery planning without drawing the elements of cybersecurity in it. I mean, and I'm sure our friends at Dell and through my panel will espouse on this further, but you'll understand how, we can secure our important data, right, through a carefully curated BCDR plan. For instance, you can probably go for data isolation. So in a case of ransomware breach, you have successfully isolated the important data, right? So you're reducing your vulnerability that is posed through a ransomware attack, right? And the second point, like I said, I always say, and cloud happens to be one of my favorite topics of discussion. You know, uh, from what it was, 10 years back to what it is now, I think the scenario is slowly evolving. You know, uh, 10 years, 15 years back, and when I was starting off focusing on BCDR as an analyst, I used to observe, especially in a country like ours, most of our DR side was always, I mean, without any exceptions, was primarily in your on-premise environments, right? You could not think of, your DR sites, say, on a on-premise environment. Backup, yes. You could probably think of, doing your, data backups on cloud, where DR sites were primarily on your on-premise environment. I think that we see a shift towards that. Not to mention that importance of on-premise in a DR on-premise still continues. In fact, a large majority of organizations based in India still perhaps have their DR sites on-premise, but the growth rates of organization moving their DR on cloud is staggering, like the case for every cloud adoption. And very comparing reasons for us. And let's look at them. I mean, typically, when we talk about BCDR on cloud, obviously, issues about not even mentioned, lower cost for backup. Because you're achieving scale, reduced downtime because you're doing it with the experts, level of customization, and the level of redundancy that you achieve. But most importantly, and I'm not going to call out each and every data point. I'll probably take for you to take a minute for you to walk you through this. But I feel one of the biggest disruptor uh, has been how you automate backup. You know, because because when we talk about BCP planning, or data planning, we all have periodic audits, right? It could be a yearly, half yearly, quarterly, daily, weekly assessment scenarios. But you know, automating that entire process in itself has always been a huge challenge, right? And so hence, uh, typically the two, I mean, for all that I mean, again, you guys are the experts. While with so many fancy tools and equipments, still the two vectors which make your BCDR plan a success are RTO and RPO, right? Let's recognize that. RTO, as we all know, stands for recovery time objective. RPO stands for recovery point objective. And you'll be, I don't know whether this comes as a surprise or not, we have seen significant advantages of how we've managed to successfully reduce, our RTOs and RPOs. Earlier these were in, you know, as high as, maybe 72 hours, 60 hours, have gone down to as low as 15 hours, 10 hours at max. Right? I mean, yes, it again depends on the industry that you belong to. For instance, if you talk about BFSI as an industry, it really cannot afford to have any loss of data, right? So recovery point objective is literally almost as good as zero, right? But what about recovery time objective, right? So I think we've seen a lot of advantages uh, moving, like I said, but it's not a one size fits all. Completely depends on your nature of work and the kind of compliance and regulation that you need to abide to. But all that I'm trying to say is, even conceptually, having a BCP or a DR on cloud is a reality today, and we see a lot of momentum in that space, right? So effectively, when we look at BCDR, I personally feel, I break it into two parts. One is about access to your data, because personally I feel one of the biggest challenges still that I see is not so much around backup, because you have all the technology and the hardware infrastructure to back up your data. More often than not, is a challenge of retrieving that information. Uh, Data tends to get corrupt. There are issues around data encryption and decryption and so on and so forth. So accessing your data becomes important, and protecting your data. So at the end of it, I mean, if you look at, and right, if I take my entire comment right to the beginning, when we speak about digital transformation, we're actually talking about data transformation and how you protect it, how you access it. So somewhere the cornerstone, the key success metrics of a successful BCDS strategy arises out of access to information or access to data and protecting that data, right? And making it further future proofing it are some key elements of how you plan your BCDR, how you do the risk assessment and mitigation, how do you respond to an incident, how do you strategize your recovery, very importantly. Because I think going forward, as I always like to say, you know the world has moved from being on the left of the boom in terms of preparing yourself as to what to do if something happens, to actually proactively preparing yourself once something happens. How do I, the remedial part of it? I see the world actually gravitating towards the right wing of that story, right? And obviously ensuring that business resilience is is a part of your process improvement engine as an organization. So for every successful deployment, as we all know, a very cliche but still so uh, in sync with today's conversation, it's all about the people, the processes, and technology also, right? uh, but having said that, right, you all know for a fact that there are struggles of managing BCDR on your own, right? And let's see some of them. So if you see, A, typically increasing complexity of IT infrastructure. Why? But now you don't, I mean, for many, many organizations, you don't live in a world where all your IT infrastructure is secured in one data center. A, you have multiple locations to deal with. B, you are working in a hybrid IT environment wherein some of your workloads may be on-premise, some of your workloads may be in a public cloud environment, some of your workloads may be in a multi-cloud environment as well. So the increasing complexity of your IT infrastructure. Challenges with timely data retrieval, very important. Inadequate risk assessment and planning due to uh, issues around what you have in time, what you have as resources, inadequacy of that, and very importantly, I think let's call it out: lack of executive buy-in, because until and unless your leadership does not see this as a necessity, they're not going to invest in this. And that is why fundamentally I feel adding that cybersecurity element to your BCDR really helps in making the right call for you. I'll tell you why. If I look at BCDR purely from a containment standpoint, that I'm preparing myself for an eventuality, people might not take a note of you. But if you say cybersecurity is a real-time scare, it can happen any moment, and hence that is part of a BCDR planning, you suddenly take a lot of recognition. So I think the philosophy is get them scared, get their attention, and get them act on your BCDR planning, right? So which eventually increases your visibility towards the larger cause, right? So with this, probably my last point, like I said, while obviously for many large organizations, you will continue to manage your, entire BCDR on your own, either on premise or on a cloud environment. But a new novel approach, I won't say new anymore, but definitely in the process, at least for a country like ours, where we see some traction in and around disaster recovery as service. This is a managed approach towards minimizing disruption. The idea is to for all organizations who are finding a challenge in the do it yourself approach. This is probably a process where you take the benefits of being you take the benefits of and the advantages of a cloud environment, right? And the service capabilities of an expert, wherein you focus purely on the strategic initiatives of your organization, right? And they help you in improving your metrics, your rapid recoveries, your geographic redundancies, make it more cost effective. Defined SLAs are there, centralized management, and again, like to emphasize on automatic backup. So essentially, what you're doing is you are offloading your efforts on managing your BCDR to an expert without compromising on the key governance measures of GRC, privacy, and security. Right. So I think it's a wrap from my end. But before before we get into the panel, just a few points for me to ponder upon. When we talk about uh, revisiting a BCDR strategy, I'm fairly confident we can't talk about to organize until unless you're a startup. It is not possible for you not to have a BCDR strategy in place. So I'm very very clear when I call this out. But when you're revisiting your BCDR, the question is how frequently do you need to do it, and why do you need to do it so frequently, right? Do you have the capabilities in house to manage this? How do you look at investments towards BCDR training and testing? How do you look at this entire issue of dealing with cybersecurity risk, and can that be integrated as part of the BCDR planning? What are the costs involved in data storage, recovery, and retrieval? What are your audits will tell you how prone are you to and susceptible are you to loss of revenue, loss of reputation damage if something happens. And last but not least, the complexities. Okay, since I spoke about a cloud-based BCDS plan, uh, are there complexities in migrating towards a cloud BCDS? Because, like I said, uh, all along we've had most of our DR on premise, and still there happens to be the chosen de facto site for most organizations. So it's a choice that you need to make based on the industry and the type of organization that you belong, given the regulatory compliance issues, right? So it's a wrap from my end. Like I said, I'll meet you on the other end for the panel. Thank you so much, and